So, My Hero Academia, chapter 310 has officially been released, and let me just say, in this video, I want to discuss something that I don't think a whole lot of people are discussing when it comes to this chapter. And no, it's not going to be about the second user, no, it's not going to be about the third user, and no, it's not going to be about their relationships to the first user of Yoichi. But the point that I really want to address is at the beginning of the chapter, when we saw the confrontation between the weasel, rodent, squirrel, ferret woman, and how she was treated and viewed by the civilians who were trying to fight her, and how that relates to the discrimination, stereotypes, and racism that is seen, relatively speaking, often in the My Hero Academia world. And before we get to that, let's hit that intro. Hey guys, how's it going? It is your boy, Big Blue Drew 97 here to talk to you more about My Hero Academia, specifically discussing the first part of My Hero Academia Manga chapter 310, titled, give me a second, I'm actually, now that I think about it, I don't think I remember what the title of this chapter was. Yeah, it did. It was Master and People. I forgot. It had a cover page. But yeah, we're going to be talking about chapter 310, and more specifically, I really want to address the interactions that we saw with the weasel, squirrel girl, whoever she really is, and how she was treated very poorly by the vigilantes, and how that relates to like sort of kind of like a theme or a running like idea in the world of My Hero Academia that was addressed actually in the first chapter. And before we get into it, I'd like to ask you, my viewers, if you haven't done so, to subscribe to our YouTube channel if you are interested in My Hero Academia content, discussions, reactions, as well as the reviews. Hit that little notification bell to be notified for whenever I upload my content. And without the way, let's get right into the discussion. So for starters, when it comes to this chapter, overall, there were two main focuses of this chapter. The latter part of the chapter is sort of a flashback to the moment where Deku was still in his coma-like state, and finishing the conversation between the first user, whose name was revealed to be Yoichi, and how his relationship to the second and third users, and how the second and third users were basically his heroes, and showing the really similar parallels between the second user and Deku, and how they both were willing to like give a helping hand to an individual that in reality they would have not, or they probably should not have helped. And so that was primarily what the latter chapter was, and the confirmation that all, if I remember correctly, all seven of the previous users of One for All are now ready to help Deku. That was the second half of this chapter. But the first half of this chapter that many people may like gloss over is the fact that when it comes to Hero Society, and that's something else that I may also talk about a little bit more in detail, is how Hero Society, or just society in general, has broken down, and it's as if it's gone back to like the ages where these superpowers, when they first manifested, how society basically stopped and crumbled, and basically how we've gone back in time. But what is even more important and more impactful that I want to talk about is how the specific individuals who are fighting off the squirrel lady, what they said and how they reacted to her, and how that is really tied to the discrimination, stereotyping, racism that we've seen in My Hero Academia in prior stories and prior chapters. So let's start off the discussion talking about what exactly happened at the beginning of this chapter in a little bit more detail. And for starters, it's a dark, cold, rainy night, as we see like three different individuals who are weirdly enough like covered in like battle armor, having these specific tools to help fight off other villains and to protect themselves. They're firing at this one like woman. She's very tall. She actually has, if I believe, a mutant type quirk, which turns her into a type of rodent, a type of weasel. I cannot say for certain like what type of creature she is. Actually, she may not even be a rodent or a weasel. She could be a totally different type of animal, but from what it appears to be, she does resemble something of the rodent family or of the weasel family. We cannot say for certain, but we see that these individuals are firing at her, and they're calling her a monster, and they say, oh yeah, you need to get out of here, we need to protect ourselves, take this woman down. But what is very interesting is that while they're saying that to her, she's trying to convey that I'm not a monster. I'm not doing anything wrong. What are you doing to me? Somebody help. Please don't shoot me. And then you have one individual's like, oh, you're trying to play the trump card of like, oh, you're doing nothing wrong. Well, I'm not going to believe you. And she fires off an attack at this woman. And luckily enough, Deku was in the area to save her. And he tries to calm down the situation and saying that everyone's on edge. Everything's going to be fine. Just please stop. Please, this woman is not a threat to you or anyone. And then you have these guys who are just have this exclamation mark like, oh, well, that doesn't matter. She shouldn't be walking around in the dark looking like, quote unquote, that. And that is something that I really want to address, that when I saw that, I'm like, wow, that's not topical at all. Yeah, we don't live in a world where people are blaming others for their problem just because they look slightly different or is in a situation that they may not have had any control over whatsoever. No, we're not seeing that in the real world at all. Especially when it comes to a particular virus pandemic that is going on in this world. No, we've never seen something like that. Oh yeah, I find it very interesting because what that entails is that society has just gone downhill to the point where it's not just paranoia, because at first you could assume that, oh, they were just paranoid that a big creature just came out of nowhere and they just assume that they're a villain because they're during times right now where villains can just walk through the street and cause harm. So yeah, they jumped to a conclusion. But then with that one line of them saying like, oh, she shouldn't have been in this situation looking like that just shows that it's not that it was like paranoia. No, these guys are pretty much like, if not discriminatory, but straight up racist in a way, because it doesn't matter what someone looks like. Like she wasn't doing anything. She was just walking in the rain. And this is something that we've actually seen prior in the story, how that there are people, specifically when it comes to specific people that have heteromorphic quirks that basically change who they are from being like normal to some type of animal form, that there has always been a sort of discriminatory slash racist like ideas thrown at them, because if you remember correctly that in chapter, give me a moment, because in chapter 220, which is the start of My Villain Academia, we get the introduction of a particular group called the CRC, or the Creature Rejection Clan. And the fact that they have clan in their name, you could possibly understand like what they may be representing in the real world. KKK. So when it comes to this is very interesting, because this just shows that in the world of My Hero Academia, there are people that specifically hate people that have heteromorphic quirks that physically change the body of the people. And this is very important because when it comes to the League of Villain, they have Spinner, who has the quirk Lizard, he has the quirk of Gecko, I believe. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's Gecko, where he can basically like cling to walls, and that's pretty much it. And that as soon as they enter this dormitory, these people just say, oh, hey, look, it's the League of Villains. And like, oh, they have a lizard with them. Disgusting. As well as like calling them sins against nature, showing that they have like a true like hatred, a true discrimination, a true racism towards like heteromorphic like people. And it shows that there exist people in this world, even though they say that these people are like fossils, that these people, their ideologies are like in the Stone Ages more or less, they still exist in the modern world just to a lesser extent, but they still exist. And this is very interesting because this could also imply that during the time there was a lot more people that thought that people who had these transformation quirks were evil and that they need to be purged. But what is very interesting is that even though those ideas may not be prevalent anymore and they may be selected to a few groups, there may still be people that still think like, oh yeah, I guess like people with heteromorphic quirks, yeah, they look weird. I don't like them. Maybe they shouldn't exist. Because here's the thing, I've been saying heteromorphic quirk, but Spinner, who does have a quirk that literally physically changes his body, specifically says in this chapter that he doesn't like the terminology. And Spinner is basically saying that, oh, it's just a term that people say, but they don't say it around other people with the quirk because they're trying to be nice and polite, but they still say it either way. I wonder if there's a word in our own society that people may say in their daily lives, but when a particular individual of a particular race, creed, nationality comes along, that word may be offensive to, that, people just don't say it anymore. Do you see the parallels in My Hero Academia and the real world? And this is very interesting because tying back into the actual chapter 310, we see in 220 that there are people that just straight up hate like heteromorphic creatures, people with like mutation like quirks that change their body, and that still kind of persists in the same way as racism and prejudice and stereotypes still persist to this day in a lesser form. In My Hero Academia, they also exist in that lesser form, but because of what happened with the villains breaking other prisoners out, causing society to regress and begin to crumble, those old ideals are bubbling up to the surface and now are becoming more prevalent, not because they weren't there in the first place, but because people were hiding it, because society deemed it as improper, deemed it as bad. But now that society has begun to crumble, those ideas are poking out through the surface because there's not going to be a whole lot of people that'll be going against it. Because literally, in the world of My Hero Academia, if you see someone who has like a monster-like quirk destroying the city, you're going to assume that they're a bad guy. And if you keep seeing it often enough, you begin to assume that anyone that may be perceived or look like a monster will automatically be a villain. And that ties into something else that we've also seen in My Hero Academia when it comes to stereotyping. Because literally, in the first chapter of My Hero Academia, the first villain that we ever see is an individual with a gigantification quirk. But what is even more interesting, and I'm going to tie into something else when it comes to the larger theme of My Hero Academia, he does have he say that he has a gigantification quirk, but that he still aesthetically looks different from the normal person. Even when he's in the shrunken size, and even when he is chained up, he still has a different look where he doesn't appear to be like the normal idea of a human in our world. And because of that idea, and because if you see a lot more people with different like mutation like quirks doing crime, you just assume that people that look different from you, look like monsters, are monsters and do commit more crimes, which is very, very discriminatory and in a lot of times very, very racist. But unfortunately, it's just a real thing, and we've seen that throughout the entirety of My Hero Academia, especially when it comes to stereotypes of how villains have particular quirks, because that idea has led to the creation of people like Toga, who her quirk was deemed to be like unapproachable, like unethical in the world of society, and may have been viewed as a villain-like quirk, and therefore she became a villain. Or even when it comes to another character like Shinso, who when he was in like middle school, he had people in his own class coming up to him and was like, "Oh man, you have a quirk that's able to control people. Oh man, that's such a villainous quirk. Man, that would be so scary if you were a villain." And they're like, "Oh, don't control me with your villainous quirk. Ha 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 ha." That's like a form of stereotyping. Just because someone has a quirk that is perceived to be villainous doesn't mean that they'll turn out villainous, but yet people are still perpetuating that idea, and it is seen through Shinso, who because of that is deliberately trying to prove them wrong because he wants to be a hero and show that this quote-unquote villainous quirk can be used for good. But it still shows that the stereotypes and the discrimination is still kind of there, even at a young age in the hero society, where you literally have middle school students saying, "Oh, you have a villainous quirk. You may be a villain. Stay away from me." And they may be saying it in a joking way, but sometimes jokes like that can be very detrimental to individuals going through this stage of middle school, still going through this growth, and they may take it upon themselves, as we've seen with Toga, which during her growing age through middle school and high school, she literally had to put on a facade and a face to cover up what society deemed as immoral and bad, which was just her quirk. And that eventually led to her breaking down, and basically we don't get the confirmation that she killed someone, but she basically stabbed the person that she loved to drink her blood because she repressed her quirk for so long because people thought that it was immoral and it was wrong and it was villainous. And that's something that we've seen so much in My Hero Academia. And the fact of the matter is, literally the beginning of My Hero Academia starts off with the narrator Deku saying, "Not all men are created equal." You know where that quote came from? Yeah, the quote, "All men are created equal," is literally from the Declaration of Independence. And Deku is basically saying that quote in the world of My Hero Academia, that not all men are created equal. And you know what sucks is that in their world with quirks, that is true. All men, all people, everyone in the world of My Hero Academia are not created equal because of the fact that 20% of the world has quirks. Sorry, 20% of the world doesn't have quirks. 80% of the world does have quirks, but even the quirks themselves vary from person to person. And when it comes to literally the main character of Deku, he was literally bullied by Kacchan because of the fact that he didn't have a quirk, and the fact that when it comes to being a hero, you are required to basically have a quirk to be a hero, which, in like realistically speaking, is like, yeah, it makes sense that you would need a quirk to be a hero. It's a prerequisite. So that's not necessarily the discrimination of it. It's just a job requirement for the job. You must have a quirk. And like some quirks are better than others, which also ties into the idea that not all men are created equal. Not everyone is born with a very useful quirk to be a hero. And the fact of the matter is, even if they were born with a quirk and they want to go into another field of work, like with construction or law enforcement, they are still unable to use their quirk in those situations, because the only way you can use your quirk freely is if you are in your own private like building, your own private home, within your own private space, or if you are a pro hero. And that seems very like not necessarily discriminatory, but it basically puts people in bubbles where if they do not fall into a specific like idea or a specific concept or doing specific actions, that they will be punished by law for something that is inherent to who they are as a person. So the fact of the matter is that when it comes to the story of My Hero Academia, throughout the entire story, you see moments of discrimination, stereotype, and racism, even to the point where when it comes to discrimination, it's not necessarily like perceived wrongdoings that you could have done. It's even if you've done things wrong, and just because you've done like these horrible things, you are automatically viewed as monsters to a certain extent. Because if you remember, when it comes to when All For One was taken down, and for the most part this pertains to All For One and everyone that is inside of the prison of Tartarus, that you have at least one like of these prison guards that every time he works there, he basically shouts off these like discriminatory phrases when he's talking about the people in Tartarus that have done wrong, where he basically like calls them monsters, calls them scum, and how they shouldn't really have rights, as seen in chapter 94 as well as in chapter 297. And this is especially seen in 297 because like one dude is talking to this guy who's talking all of this discriminatory stuff, like basically like saying that, oh yeah, the people in this prison are like no longer human, we should just kill them all, and it's like they still have human rights. And he basically is like, and you have them basically talking about how potentially what they're doing in like the Tartarus prison may go against human right violations. If you have someone who's literally calling these prisoners monsters, it shows that in the world of My Hero Academia, like hatred for other people because they're different from you has always been there, and it's just been built up more and more over time. And that when the villains were freed, when the heroes lost against the villains in the Paranormal Liberation Front War, that was probably most likely the breaking point where it began to have people basically being able to freely speak about the hatred that they have for other people of their own like nationality, their own race. Like, because for the most part, even though some heteromorphic people look different, they're still human. Like, the only difference is really like aesthetic like looks, but yeah, they're still human. They still act the same, they still do the same things that you do, but just because they look slightly different or very different, people hate them. And now that society has begun to crumble even more in the world of My Hero Academia, the people are now more free to basically establish and justify their hatred for people that just slightly looks different. And that is what the connotation of these first few pages are alluding to in chapter 310. The society has begun to broken down to the point where normal people are just expressing the hatred that they've always held in their heart against individuals that look a little bit different, and allowing their stereotypes, their prejudice, their discrimination to come out in unjustified ways against people that have really done nothing wrong and are just trying to survive the same way that they are. And this is just something interesting because this isn't a type of idea that is really seen in like other manga in Shonen Jump, with a few exceptions such as One Piece. And so I just find it interesting that Horikoshi is deciding to go down this route and like sprinkling in these few inklings of like racism and stereotypes that people have in society, because realistically speaking, when it comes to My Hero Academia, it's like a good representation of what our world and what our society would be with the addition of quirks, like how people would respond in similar situations. And I would say that it's very accurate, and it's scary how accurate it can be in this fictional world. So yeah, I just really wanted to talk about this one, like few scenes when it comes to My Hero Academia, because I just find it very interesting about how Horikoshi has decided to put these very can be very personal, like very controversial topics in a manga catered towards like young adults. So I find it very interesting that he's deciding to do this, and I really appreciate it because I'm able to talk about it a little bit more and like give my thoughts on it. So yeah, that's all I really have to say about this chapter right now, specifically when it comes to this scene. Were there any other instances of discrimination, racism, stereotypings, prejudice that I didn't say in this video that you've seen in My Hero Academia? Leave your thoughts down below, as well as if you haven't done so, subscribe to my YouTube channel. I try to make My Hero Academia discussions once a week, as well as the reviews, as well as reactions, as well as covering spoilers on My Hero Academia, Dr.STONE, Jujutsu Kaisen, all that cool stuff. So that's something that you're interested in, subscribe to my YouTube channel and hit that notification bell to be notified for whenever I upload. And like the video if you liked it, disliked it if you disliked it, leave a comment down below, do all that cool jazz, and hopefully I'll be able to catch you in my next video. Goodbye!